Hello. Happy Sunday, May 31st. Early one morning, when fog and day were dawning, I woke with the thought of a book I love, I want to share with you. Here it is, Fog Magic by Judith L. Sauer. I've known about it for years. It's extremely atmospheric. Does this not look like the land of the tall sentinels that we live in? A little bit about this book, just to see if you really would like to join in. Every week, I thought I'd read a chapter, Fog or No. So here we are. All her life, Greta had loved the fog. Her mother said it was unnatural. She herself hated the great gray clouds blowing in from the sea. But somehow, in every generation of Addingtons, a child was born who understood the fog. No one knew why, not even Greta, until the day on the old post road when the surrey came by with a woman whose plum-colored dress rustled like a three-master coming up in the wind, driving toward Blue Cove. And Greta knew that there, where no house had stood for 100 years, she would find what she was asking. "Go on," said the woman. "What is it? What is it that you are seeking?" "In the second house, you'll find Rita Moral. You two will pull well together." And now, Chapter 1, Fog Magic, the Spell of the Fog. From the time she was a baby in her cradle, Greta had loved the fog. Every soul in the little fishing village at the foot of the mountain had learned to accept the fog. It was part of their life. They knew that for weeks on end they must live within its circle, but they made no pretense of liking it. Those who tilled their little plots of land hated it when it stopped the hay from drying. The men who fished dreaded it, for either it kept them on shore altogether and cut down their meager earnings, or it made their hours on sea more dangerous than ever. Only the lobster poachers who robbed honest men's lobster pots or set out on their own out of season really liked it. The lobster poachers and small Greta, fog admirers. And with Greta, it was more than liking. On days when the gray clouds of fog rolled in from the sea and spread across the village, she would watch it drift past the windows with a look on her small face that almost frightened her mother. "Goodness, child," Gertrude Addington would say to the little mite in the high chair, "you look as if you were seeing things, and pleasant things at that. I believe you like this beastly fog. Don't you know that your father is out there, like as not running a reef at this very minute? And my clean clothes mildewing for want of a bit of proper sun to dry them out." But then Greta would gurgle so happily and throw wide her arms with such eagerness to grasp and hold this queer gray smoke that Gertrude's irritability would vanish like the fog itself when the sun came suddenly through. As soon as Greta could walk, Greta found that she might as well put her housework aside on foggy days and give herself over to minding her child. The first thin wraiths of fog in the high pasture were enough to set her small daughter's eyes sparkling. Greta would be working her way cautiously to the door, and when it drew close enough to blur their own outbuildings, she would be scampering down the pasture lane as fast as her little feet could carry her. "Oh, I'm at my wit's end minding the child on a foggy day," Mother said to old Kill. He had stopped on his way home from the smokehouse to leave a Finn and Hattie, and he smiled down now at the bedraggled small girl whom Gertrude had just retrieved from beyond the garden. The old man laughed. "Ah, dear. Some are moonstruck, they say, and some are sunstruck, they say. Maybe this little one is fog-struck. Don't worry about her, Gertrude. It's good for a young one to want to know the world she lives in all kinds of weather. Fog is a favorite here." And he ran his big hand lightly over her damp little curls. "I can't see that it does this little mess of seaweed any harm to be well wetted down on a day such as this. But you might try mooring her to the apple tree and save yourself some time in minding her. So the small girl came to be moored at the end of the clothesline, like an idle dory on every day when the gray wisps of fog came rolling in. Now Greta was 10 when she began to sense that she was looking for something within the fog. Until then, it had only given her a happy feeling, just as the first snowflakes delighted some of the other girls and boys, or the first fall winds that set the birch leaves blowing. But from the day when she had gone to find old Rosie, the cow, something had never been quite the same. Now the village of Little Valley lay on a narrow neck of land between two great arms of the sea, and like a lazy giant, North Mountain lay sprawled, the full length of the peninsula, until at the very end it sat up in a startled precipice at the sight of the open sea. Years before, a number of villages had dotted the shore on either side. Now only a few were left, and those were dwindling in size as the men despaired of making a living by fishing. At the foot of the mountain and following the line of its base ran the highway, and here the Royal Mail, the grocery truck, the butcher, and the tourist who had lost his way made his daily or weekly or chance trips down the neck to the sea and back again. But there was another road, a road less direct, filled with convenient curves, the old post road. This was the road the first settlers had built in the wilderness. They had come by sea, many of them, and made their little clearings near the shore. Gradually, they had extended their clearings inland, and in time, with tremendous effort, they had threaded their holdings together on a narrow, uncertain road through a giant spruce forest. Now, with the new highway, generations later, had come new houses away from the shore and far more sheltered. Only cellar holes remain to mark the earlier homes. Now, this old post road was a joy to Greta. A part of it ran through her father's land, and even though it had fallen so low as to serve as a mere lane to the pastures, there was something grand and romantic about it still. Years of spring fresh eggs had washed away the dirt. The stones were bare that had formed its foundation, and to follow it, Greta felt, was like walking in the bed of a dry mountain stream. Now Greta knew every stone, every curve of it for miles, up and over the high pastures and then down again toward the sea. Now this was the road her forefathers had traveled. Surely, she thought, it must lead somewhere worth going. And then there was the day when old Rosie was particularly stubborn. "Greta! Greta!" her mother called, calling her from play. "Rosie isn't at the bars with the other cows. Your father's had a hard day getting in the hay. You'd best go and look for her before he does. You'll probably meet her on the way, and you'll need not to go far." Greta started willingly enough. She had heard the foghorn blowing at Tollerton. Down in the passage, and she knew there was fog on the way. "Want me to go along?" one of the boys asked. "Oh, you'd better not, Hazen. I may be late. I love to tarry." She thanked him hastily and hurried away. To be caught in the fog and with the best excuse in the world was something too precious to share. She found Rosie far off the old road and down at the cove. Rosie looked anything but guilty. Greta laughed. "You too love the fog. I can sense it." "You're such a darling," she said to her. "I think you stayed down there on purpose so I could drive you home in the fog. But that's not fair, you know, because Father would have had to come if Mother hadn't noticed. So I'm here." She hurried Rosie along the stones of the shore, up through the thick spruce trees, to the clearing up beyond. The fog was closing in quite rapidly now. You didn't notice it in the woods, but out in the open it was already quite thick. Even Rosie began to look soft and furry and indistinct, like an imaginary cow that you tried to see in the clouds. It was just as they turned out of the path to the cove and into the old road that Greta happened to look off toward the south. Ah. "Rosie, wait!" she called sharply. She caught her breath and stared. If only stupid old Rosie could see it too. Surely there was the outline of a building. It was blurred and indistinct, but those straight, upright lines, that steep angle, no spruce could ever look that way. Greta's heart almost stopped beating. But she had no silly feeling of fear. Fog had always seemed to her like the magic spell in the old fairy tales, a spell that caught you up and kept you safe once you were inside it, as you would have been within a soap bubble. But this indistinct form was stranger than anything she had ever seen before. Here was a house where no house stood. But indistinct though it was, she could follow every line of it. A high, sharp roof, a peaked gable, a little lean-to at the side. It was all there. Just such a house as those she saw every day in the village. No. So this, she said to herself, this is what can happen to you in a fog. I always knew there must be something hidden, something magic. It was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her in her whole life. Rosie, far ahead, was mooing at the pasture bars, and Greta tore herself away to follow. And once inside the barn, she wished that she'd stayed and gone closer. But the memory of the house stayed with her still. She stood in the barn doorway, looking out across the yard. The fog continued, dense and gray. It blanketed the yard and made the house across the intervening feet as dim as the other one had been to the south. Behind her, in the quiet, sweet-smelling barn, her father sat at milking. "Father," Greta spoke softly. "Yes, what is it, Greta?" The milk streamed rhythmically into the pail. "Father, down where the path to the little cove turns off in the old road, is there any old house off deep in the spruces to the south?" Her father never stirred on the milking stool, but he dropped his hands quietly on his knees. The barn was very still, but just for a moment. "Well, it's an old cellar hole off there, Greta," he said. "Just an old cellar hole. There's been no house upon it in my day." His voice became as calm and slow as ever, and then he added something very strange. "Every cellar hole ought to have a house," he said quietly. "Yes, every cellar hole ought to have a house." "Yes, Father," Greta answered. It was almost as if he told her that she should build a house, and she had almost promised. Rosie stirred restlessly. Father cleared his throat and went on milking. "You'd best go on in and help your mother with the tea," he said. "She'll be fussing about. She doesn't know you're back yet. She'll be worried." Greta stepped out of the warm, fragrant barn into the cool fog. It had always seemed to be whispering a secret to her, and now at last the words of the secret were becoming more clear. Greta did not know what Walter Addington and his wife talked about that night. She went up to bed at her usual time. Her little room with its steep sloping ceiling and its single window faced out toward the high pasture and the old road. She loved the view, but tonight you couldn't even see as far as the crooked apple tree by the wall. She undressed and slipped into bed. The hushed voices in the room below and the distant rhythmic blowing of the foghorn down in the passage gave her the same warm, safe feeling that had always given her as she drifted off to sleep. Whatever it was that was said that night, Gertrude was persuaded to let her child wander as she willed in the fog. Father had somehow worked the miracle. Sometimes Gertrude would look so perplexed, so distressed, when Greta had finished her stint of housework and was free to go, that the girl would come running back to throw her arms around her mother's neck. "Why, Mother," she would say, "can't you see the fog is lovely? Why can't you see that? And I know every stone in the old road. I can't get lost. Please, please, don't hate to let me go." "Oh, go on, child, if you must." Gertrude would even laugh a little at her own vague fears. "It's just that you're so different from what I used to be at your age. We always hated this miserable wet fog. We'd scurry for home at the first sign of it closing in. It was always the same." They never could understand each other about the fog, Mother Gertrude and her daughter. One day now, morning, Greta opened her eyes to see a gray, heavy blanket filling the window space. A fog so thick on a Saturday, too, when there was no school. It was the first really foggy day since the night she had seen the strange house back there, deep in the spruces. The first chance she had had to see if she'd imagined it all. Could it be? She hurried through her Saturday work. She thought of every little thing her mother could possibly want done. The usual Saturday errands, the washing up. Her own little room was as tidy as a ship's cabin, and her Sunday gloves were washed and hung on the bars over the stove to dry. The collar was pressed on her best dress. Mother eyed her sharply. "I know why you're so light on your feet this morning. My, you're wanting to go off again, aren't you, Greta?" Greta laughed. Not even her mother's crossness could spoil this day. "I may go, mayn't I, Mother?" she coaxed. "It's only 11 o'clock, and if I take a sandwich and I start now, I can be way over the high pasture before noontime. Please, Mother, please. I may even find some early berries. Well, at least I'll take a pail." And Gertrude had been churning. She was pressing the little pats of butter with an acorn stamp. She laid the stamp down and looked at Greta without a word. "Mother," the girl said slowly, "please, please try just once to understand. I love the fog." Well, it wasn't very encouraging, and Greta began hesitantly again. You know the way a spider web looks on foggy days? Strings and strings of the tiniest pearls, all the most lovely pattern. Well, everything else is different, too. Once you're inside the fog," she finished, kind of stumbling along, sort of worried Mother would change her mind and say, "Stay." "Inside?" said Gertrude sharply. "Inside what, I'd like to know?" Just inside the fog." Greta told her it was no use. She could never get into simple words. No one else could see. The fog always seemed to her like a magic wall. You stepped through and walked until your own familiar house was gone away. And then something strange and wonderful would happen. She was sure of it. She made her sandwich quickly, pulled on her old coat, set her beret. "Leave the bread tins and the dinner dishes for me." "Don't worry, Mother. I'll wash them when I get back," she said. "Truly I will," as she opened the door, and out she went. "Don't be late," said Mother. And then, a little more pleasantly, "I'll save a plate of chowder for your tea. You'll like as not be chilled all through." Greta gave her a loving little squeeze as she slipped out. The day had begun well, and the best part of it lay ahead of her, off into the spruces, hopefully where she would still see the old house. And that ends the spell of the fog. I wish you a happy Sunday, and some sunlight if you wish, but for me, it's the fog today. Good day.